So we've been looking at our big questions for the last couple of weeks, as Joe has said, and perhaps one of the biggest questions of all is this: why did Jesus really rise from the dead? Or is his resurrection just another way of talking about him going to heaven when he died? Our society is not great when thinking about death. It's almost as if we think that we're not going to die. So we put it out of our mind, a bit like shoving all the rubbish in our house under the stairs or in the loft, or in our case in the garage. Out of sight and out of mind. And because of this, lots of really odd beliefs about the afterlife begin to develop. The most popular and enduring is some kind of ethereal vision of heaven where our souls float up into the clouds, we dress like angels, maybe we even become angels. We wear lots of white bling and we strum on a harp for all eternity. Now that, to me, doesn't sound particularly exciting. It does sound a little bit dull, if I'm honest. And you don't really find anything like this in the Bible. And yet, our failure to grapple with this question of what happens next means that we create a kind of jumble of ideas about what heaven or the afterlife is like. The resurrection of Jesus is our biggest clue to help us discover the answer to this question, because the resurrection of Jesus is at the heart of our faith. And our faith and all eternity stands or falls on whether the resurrection really did happen or not. But surely, resurrection is physically impossible. After all, hands up who has had a friend or a relative who has died and has actually been raised to life again. We know that dead people don't come back to life again. The people in Jesus' day knew that dead people do not come back to life again. In fact, they knew it probably better than us, because in the ancient world, death was an ever-present reality and not just consigned to hospices and hospitals. But with Jesus' resurrection, something very strange clearly happened. Something that the disciples had not expected and which they had real trouble in articulating. If you read the resurrection accounts in all of the four Gospels, then those bits of the Gospels are very different from the rest of the stories in the Gospels. It's as if the writers are really struggling to put into words what they witnessed. So what are we to do with the resurrection? Well, like any investigator or judge, maybe we need to put it on trial, examine the evidence, build a case, and then come to a verdict. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, here is the case for the resurrection. First, let's look at the facts. It is a fact that Jesus of Nazareth was killed by the Romans on a cross. There are plenty of witnesses from ancient literature outside of the Bible who say this. That is as much a fact as Julius Caesar or Cleopatra existing. Let's examine the crime scene, so to speak. In fact, church looks a bit like a crime scene with all these tapes saying keep back and keep 2 meters distance. The tomb, or rather the empty tomb. No one disputes that the tomb was empty. Jesus was buried, but 3 days later the tomb was empty and the body was gone. Was it the disciples who stole the body? Well, if it was them, why on earth would you dig up the body of your friend, especially if you were in fear of your life? Was it the Romans or the Jewish authorities who dug up the body? Well, if it was them, why didn't they produce the body once stories about Jesus rising from the dead began to circulate? If neither the disciples nor the authorities took the body, then who on earth did? Next, in a trial, witnesses are always key. And there were witnesses. The women were the first to find the empty tomb, and they were the first to see the risen Jesus. This is in all four Gospel accounts. Except that if you were making up a story about Jesus rising from the dead in the first century, then you would not have had women as witnesses, because at the time, women were seen as unreliable and their evidence wasn't seen as credible. So if you were making up this story, you certainly wouldn't have invented women as the chief witnesses. But there were other witnesses as well, as we read from the passage in 1 Corinthians. Peter, the 12 apostles, James, the brother of Jesus, and over 500 people. Some, Paul tells us, were still alive when he was writing and could testify to the fact. They must have seen something. 500 people don't have the same hallucination. Then we need to consider motive. Why on earth would you make up the story of a crucified Messiah who rose from the dead? No other historical figure is claimed to have been killed and then raised from the dead. And also, why would you die for a lie? Nearly all of Jesus' early disciples were killed for their faith in Jesus. If they knew he was really dead and they made it all up, do you really think they'd let themselves be killed for it? I certainly wouldn't. So the crux of the evidence is that of an empty tomb, which is a fact, and the changed lives of the disciples, which is also a fact. After all, they were hiding in an upper room 1 minute, and then the next minute they were going out telling people that Jesus had been risen from the dead. And if you put all of this together, then I think that all of this points to proof of the resurrection. What changed a band of cowards hiding in an upper room into courageous men and women who would go out into the known world proclaiming that Jesus was alive? You would only do this if you really believed that it had happened. And you would only believe that it really happened if you saw Jesus and if the tomb was empty. And there I rest my case, because there is no other credible alternative apart from the startling fact that Jesus really did rise from the dead. And this really matters. It's not just an add-on to our faith, it's central to what Christians believe. As Paul says, if it's not true, then we may as well just pack up and go home. There is no point in being a Christian. There's no point in following a dead Messiah, because when all's said and done, we'll just end up like him. But just stop and consider for a moment what it actually means if Jesus has been raised from the dead. It means that what he said was true, that he could forgive sins, that he could restore our relationship with God, that he could give us life forevermore. It means that he really was the Messiah. He really was the Son of God. It means that he blessed through death and into life, not an ethereal kind of spiritual afterlife, but a future where we will all be bodily raised from the dead, just like Jesus. For Jesus, this was just the beginning. He is the first fruits of those who have died and who have been raised. He is the first, but he won't be the last.